Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we are looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm not Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com. I am Andy Nelson from the Next Real Film Podcast. Doing a couple solo episodes here, but don't worry, Matthew will be back. Today, we are talking about minute 34, which begins with a man getting out of a truck and ends with Jane looking for a little bear who isn't where it should be in the sky. Joining us on the show again, we have Jay Shepard, owner of MCU Location Scout. Happy Thursday, Jay.
Oh, happy Thursday to you, Andy.
Hey, what of all, you've read Thor, you've watched all the movies, of everything that you have absorbed related to Thor, what is your favorite Thor moment?
Oh, my goodness.
Can you pinpoint?
Well, I'm going to separate it into kind of comics and movies, because I got to say, I really enjoy Ragnarok. That tonally just hits me where I live. It's both pulls your heartstrings and it makes you laugh. But from the comics, I still have a very soft spot for Throg, which is when Thor was turned into a frog in the late 80s by comics, you know.
Yep, right. Who we get a cameo of in Loki very briefly.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, very cool, very cool. So in Ragnarok, is there a particular Thor moment that you love, or is it just kind of the whole thing?
The buddy stuff between Thor and Loki, I really like seeing the growth there. Probably the moment on the elevator where they are going to play Get Help, and no, we're not going to play Get Help again. I think that's a really fun moment.
And then they come out, Get Help! Yeah, that's great. Again, the comedy. They're great with their comedic timing in the Thor stories. So I really love what they do with those. All right, well, we're going to start digging into our minute here in just a minute. But first, take a listen to this. We've taken our show art and we've dropped it on all the merch available over in our store. If you would like to wear some Marvel Movie Minute inspired clothing, or have a mug or sticker or whatever it may be, you can find it by going to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute and clicking on merch. We are jumping back in where we left off. In the last minute, we have our townie hopping out of his red Dodge D-Series pickup truck, and it is no other than J. Michael Straczynski. That is right. We have the author of the Thor run for quite a while in Series 3, and also the original screenplay, or the original story, really, before the screenwriters came on to work on it. And, Babylon 5, if Matthew was here, I know he has a whole diatribe about Babylon 5, which you won't get to hear. Maybe we'll do it as a members bonus episode or something. But he is a big fan of Babylon 5 and has a lot to say about that. But what's your sense of J. Michael Straczynski? Have you read much of his line? Are you familiar with his other works?
I'm familiar with him from TV, from Babylon 5, and I'm sure that at some point I have read his work. I'm sure that at some point, touching on Thor, I have read one of his issues, though nothing completely stands out to me from any of his comic runs. I really just kind of know him from his TV work, I guess.
Gotcha.
And I would not have recognized him in this part.
Right.
There are so many comic writers and artists that, like, I see their name and I know what I'm going to get in the comic, or I see their art and I know whose art it is. But if you put me down with that person that I am so enamored with, it's like, who's this guy? Why are we talking to this guy? So
right.
I just don't know what they look like.
Yeah. Well, apparently Walt Simonson had a cameo in Asgard and was at the coronation and was somewhere close to Sif and Frigga, but
he's sitting at a table. Yeah, I think I've seen him in. It's a really quick shot, but yeah, he's sitting at the table actually with them, I believe.
Okay, interesting. What's great about Straczynski and his run of the Thor comics, and probably why they brought him on to kind of start the story, kind of come up with the basic story, is because his run really is the one that really kind of they used for the setting here. And granted, in his, Thor ends up in rural Oklahoma, but here it's like we're in rural New Mexico. It has a very similar sense to it.
Gotcha.
And so I think that's largely why he ended up kind of having such a role in this particular story.
And that's good that they're, when you hear these stories that have been coming out probably more lately than previous about artists and writers from the comics not getting compensated properly for the use of their characters or their storylines. It's all this kind of contractual BS and stuff that shows up. And to be able to have some of those creators honored by, having moments, at least early on in the MCU, getting a chance to show up and cameo in the film. I know this is something that, doesn't really happen much anymore, at least not that I can think of. I think that's a really cool way to honor the creators and their work.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to blank on his name, who did... he had created Thanos. He pops up in a cameo.
Jim Starlin.
Yeah, right. He's in the counseling session at the start of Endgame.
Oh my gosh, you are! I don't know how many times I've watched that, and I haven't even realized that was him.
It speaks to the whole sense that sometimes you're like, I'm not quite sure what these people look like. I love reading their work, but yeah, you're not necessarily sure.
Well, and also I kind of have a sense of Jim Starlin 1970s style, and I know he looks very different today.
A little different now. A little different now, yeah. A little more gray around the edges. But so anyway, our townie here has discovered this crash site and decides, I'm going to, stroll down, or kind of like, try not to fall as I run down into the base of this impact crater here to see what's at the bottom. And I find it so strange, the way that they have designed this, because it really looks like they poured some cement and then set the hammer in it. And I struggle when I look at it, because I'm like, sure, maybe Mjølnir hit so hard that it like liquefied the earth and kind of created a cement. But as I look at it, I'm like, well, they just kind of poured some cement and just kind of set the hammer.
See,
in
now I look at it and say, this is a really cool prop that they've set up, because, a lot of times film props are not designed in the same way that a real object would be. And so actors oftentimes have to be careful not to break the mystique of whatever it is, whether it's a rubber prop or something that's just built differently, inexpensively. And here, you can actually have people, you're right, it is like poured in cement, and you can have people pulling on it as hard as they want, and really acting with it. There's a great scene, I guess, coming up where, you see the town, the whole group of townies really pulling hard on it.
Exactly. Everybody gets their chance to pull on the sword, right? It's all that whole Excalibur out of the stone sort of thing that they're kind of going for here.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think maybe it came down and it impacted so hard into a piece of rock, it just embedded itself, and all of the loose dirt was blown away from around that piece of rock. That's why it's
well, that's why it looks that way.
Yeah.
We'll go with that. So my next note is that I think that we need to start judging for all these people to figure out, is this person worthy, and why isn't this person worthy? Because all of a sudden now he's trying to pick up Mjølnir and he can't budget. So he's clearly not worthy.
He told his wife he was going to the market. And instead he went out to this crater, to see if he could find
exactly
a piece of gold or a crystal or, whatever that fell from the heavens, and make a quick buck. Because he's got a gambling problem, I would guess, as well.
There must be some dark story that he has. Maybe he has a body in the back. We don't really get a good view.
That is
of
true.
The back
yeah.
of his pickup. So
the whole spin-off, I can see it's they do a little one shot with this.
Exactly. Where was he on his way to? But we're going to find out there's a lot of unworthy people around rural New Mexico here for some peculiar reason. But another interesting element is when he's trying to pull Mjølnir up, there's this humming sound that we've always kind of heard when Thor is wielding it, and it's this sound that we hear. But it's interesting here because as he grabs it and pulls on it, it kind of rings a little bit, and then as soon as he lets go, it goes away. And that makes me wonder, are we meant to think that this is something that they're hearing too, or is it just for the audience, like the sense of magic of holding Mjølnir?
That's a good question. It's hard to tell if it's actually like dietetic music or not or sound effect for this. I kind of feel that it's maybe like a resonance thing. I guess like asking me right now, I would say, yeah, probably these people hear it. It's like when, there's a vibration in something and you don't really notice it until, you set like a glass down and it vibrates, or you grab something and it kind of makes your fillings hum or something like that. So maybe that's kind of what it is that the physical contact is creating this, and that's because of the vibrational frequency of the magical properties of this hammer, the Uru stone.
It's an interesting thing, and obviously it's a cinematic thing. I mean, we always hear swords like ringing. I mean, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon has just some fantastic sounds that seem to be coming from the sword that they use in that particular film. But my understanding is like when you like pull a sword out of a sheath, it should be completely silent. It shouldn't be making that scraping sound
for obvious reasons. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Same kind of thing with that the 80s have kind of given us with firearms, where the guns just make these obscenely loud click-clack noises and, all the shells flying out. And it's just, if something's making that much noise, I don't think that the mechanism is probably working properly, right? Because it should be a lot smoother. There shouldn't be that much contact with all those moving parts. So, again, like you said, cinematic, cinema is about heightened realism. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what they're obviously trying to show here. And it's otherworldly as well.
Exactly. Well, we leave our townie here with a which is a great little moment.
So subtle. It's well played too. Yeah,
it is. It works really well. And now we jump and we're over in Puente Antiguo. We see we're again Brana and his Dutch angles. We got a great Dutch angle shot here. We're looking at the sign, the city limits sign, basically giving us the population and elevation of the town. And I just want to go through those because population 2,175. I really question that. This is very much what I see as a 3-digit population sort of town.
Well, it depends on, is it an incorporated town or does it include like the ranchers, several miles out?
Yeah. But even that's a lot of ranchers though.
Yeah.
It just seems like, okay, because, the elevation, 6,056. Now, fittingly, they use the elevation of Galisteo, which is, as you pointed out last time, it's pretty much the nearest town to the movie set that we're on in this particular case. And so they use the same elevation. Sure, I get it. But just as comparison, Galisteo has a population, as of the 2010 census, of 253 people.
Oh, my goodness.
And so it's just like, I mean, when I see this little tiny town, I'm like, over 2,000 people live here?
Yeah, that's like a factor of 10 or 9. Yeah.
That is a lot of people.
And again, it's a super quick shot. How many people get that in their first viewing? But I guess if I were making a film and I were putting Easter egg kind of things in it, I would want them to be, I guess, realistic, because I know there will be people, hopefully, that would pause and, scrutinize minutes of your film.
Yeah, right.
So, why would they do that? Because, maybe to make it seem like it's a little more populated, just to, when you can talk about the destroyer coming later, okay, there's that many more people at risk potentially for this area.
Yeah, maybe. But it's not like Jane came here for living, right? She came here very specifically to study. So I guess it didn't, to her sense, to the sense of her side of the story, it didn't matter how big the town it was. If it was 253, that would have been fine.
Right. It's location only.
Yeah, exactly. But to your point, I mean, that maybe that is it. Like they wanted to make it seem like the destroyer is potentially going to be killing a lot more people.
Or do people really not know how big small towns or how small towns are?
Yeah,
I mean,
right. Like, did the prop people just accidentally put on, or the production design people, did they accidentally put on an extra digit when they were kind of having this sign put together?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're right, though. Like, now that we are scrutinizing and focusing on this, I would say it's probably 50% too big, just given like you really don't even see that many people out.
Exactly. So. Yeah, it's a very small town. And then the other thing, and this is again tying many properties together, but the fact that when we looked at the one shot in our hiatus episode where we talked about a funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer,
love that,
and Agent Coulson is driving here. And when he passes the mileage sign, when you look at the mileage, and again, we talked about this in way too much length then, but when you look at the mileage from where he is to Gallup, New Mexico, to Albuquerque, to Puente Antiguo, it is nowhere near Galisteo. Like, it's probably closer to Roswell or Truth and Consequences, somewhere in that area, rather than as close to Santa Fe as it is. And so it is, I don't know. So the elevation also doesn't make a lot of sense, because if it were in those directions, it's a much lower elevation. So again, it's just one of those little things that obviously...
Right. And Truth or Consequences, that's probably like a 500 population town as well, I would guess.
Exactly.
It's pretty small, I know. Actually have a distant in-law that lives there.
Oh, okay. It's one of those places that has just such a great town name. I've always loved it because of the name.
Yeah, TRC.
When we were talking about the one shot, we said, you know what? We like to think of it as Roswell. Like, we like to think that they clocked the mileage to Roswell, because it seems like the sort of place that would have had this sort of thing happen, with the whole things from the sky. But obviously the people working on Thor weren't of that same mindset when they were putting it together. So, it is what it is.
Right. Yeah, a lot of decisions, have to get made, and sometimes, there's not always one person in charge of that. It's all with all the departments. So, nobody cared enough to make that important because it wasn't in the script, or it just didn't need to happen for any reason. So somebody just had to make a choice.
Exactly. They make the choice, and little do they know that 10 years later, somebody would be analyzing it and scrutinizing it 1 minute at a time, breaking it down. Well, okay, so now we're in the town proper. This is really where we get to actually start exploring this town. And you've kind of done your exploration of all these different locations, and this is a very specific Western town set that we happen to be on. Can you tell us a little bit about this particular location?
Yeah, so this, as you mentioned, it is a movie ranch. It's technically within Galisteo's limits, I guess. It's called the Cook Movie Ranch, also called Cerro Pelon. And it's been used for a number of Western towns for movies. I think Silverado was one of the films that was shot there. What's interesting is that at being a movie ranch, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a backlot set, but usually without any kind of soundstage setup. It's a fully outdoor set where they build buildings, whether or not those buildings have interiors. They may just be facades, like you would see on the back lot of, Universal Studios or Warner Brothers or something like that. And so for Thor, they actually took down, they kept, I guess, maybe some of the bare bones of the buildings and the kind of the orientation of the town, like the streets are still the streets, but they paved the streets because it's normally just a dirt Western set, and they built all these buildings, put up the signage. So it's like, a real 7-Eleven sign and, all the other little buildings and stuff there. And then they made that distinctive Smith building, which I assume is some kind of ex-car dealership.
Smith Motors, yep.
Yeah, where Jane has everything set up. It's a beautiful location. I mean, the fact that, this looks like a real town, but it is, population zero, really,
right,
when it comes down to it. but they've got that great location with the star on top, which speaks to some of the themes from the movie, and allows the characters to sit on the roof. And you also get an overview of the of the town and the space, plus allowing for all of the third act destruction that they need to do in this location as well. So it's pretty cool.
It's a great little Western town set. And yeah, you mentioned Silverado. Interestingly, Kenneth Branagh, when he worked on Wild Wild West, they filmed some of that movie in this particular Western town.
Oh, look at that.
And 310 to Yuma was a more recent one that they filmed some of it here. Now, interestingly, Tom Ford actually bought this location and had been, I think in 2001, it had been in use for quite a long time. And then I guess in 2016, he actually put it on the market, trying to sell it for $75 million. From what I could find, as of 2019, he still hadn't sold it. The price at the time was $48 million. So, if you've got some spare change and you're looking to take on a movie set of your own, there you go. Reach out to them and maybe you can pick this one up.
Well, Westerns are not doing what they used to do. So unless you can do like maybe a zombie Western, that is a genre that has been untapped in the current horror market, I think.
Somebody needs to get on that.
Yeah.
Well, in New Mexico, I mean, it's busy, full of all sorts of productions. So you'd think that they could find another way to use it. But it's interesting because so rarely do you hear of a project like this adapting it and turning it into a modern town in a location. And that's what I found so interesting about it. I struggle with it because I'm like, well, it's like, who comes to this place, especially when 2,000 people are living here? Like I struggle, when I see the town, I'm like, there's really no way in or out, but it's always busy. And I kind of, my mental thing doesn't say it's not a real town.
Right. And they've got big name franchises. I mean, 7-Eleven.
Yeah, 7-Eleven.
Right there. Yeah.
Exactly. If anything, it should be what's the Traveling J, like the one that's always by the side of the interstate when you're driving.
Flying J, yeah.
Flying J, right. That's what it should be. But what was interesting, and this was something that Branagh really intentionally kind of wanted with this town, is that it's kind of almost a mirror. In fact, kind of a much lower end version of what we had in Asgard, right? We had the beautiful palace right in the center, the Valaskjalf palace right there in the middle with the rainbow bridge running out of town. And here we have Puente Antiguo, old bridge. This is kind of the older version of Asgard. And we've got this road kind of coming right into town and just going to this quote palace right in the middle, which is that Smith Motors with the big star on top. And so it was a very intentional design that they had here to kind of create that mirror. And I think that's actually an aspect I really like about it.
Well, and that's what's so great about, when you have the ability in a film to kind of do what you can and build it from scratch in terms of production design. You don't have to find a real location that, well, it'll kind of do what we want to do, but it's not going to be as obvious, I guess. Whereas, like you're talking about here, the parallels are much more overt. And setting this up. Yeah. And, they had the ability to, they could have reoriented the town so that the sun was, setting at the end of Main Street if they wanted to, all those kind of decisions that
right. Absolutely.
You would never make in terms of like building a real town, probably not building a real town. But for film sets, like you want to have the sun in a specific location if you're going to be shooting outdoors because you want to have, everything lit in the way by the sun as much as you could, to have it look as best on film, because that's exactly your end product. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And as you said, I mean, we have the 7-Eleven, we see a newsstand, a liquor store. We're going to see some of the other locations. We have that great the Smith Motors with the giant star. And then there's an interesting billboard advertising Land of Enchantment, Journey into Mystery, right over the newsstand, which I kind of love because it's a great nod to the origins of Thor, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the New Mexico slogan, or the state
Land of Enchantment
slogan, Land of Enchantment, and then Journey into Mystery. I think number 83 was the first appearance of Thor, and so that's where he got his start for 30, 40 issues, and then at some point they decided, well, he was the star of this what was previously a science fiction fantasy title that was being published prior to Marvel doing superheroes, and they revamped it and then turned it into the Mighty Thor. So when you talk about Thor, like number 300, it's really not, because you have to subtract all those issues that Thor wasn't actually in, because they just kind of continued numbering, but that's some weird esoteric comic thing.
It's so when they start them in like these different, because Iron Man started the same way, you know, they start in different comic series almost to just test them out and see how they work before they get their own line. So yeah, it's an interesting way that they've kind of decided to do that, but hey, it works for them. So, but the other funny thing about that billboard is that, and apparently it's just because the shot is so short, they didn't really worry about it, but they Greeked out, which is when they cover it up for a film, they cover up other information that had been on the billboard before they modified it. And they didn't put anything in place of it. So you could actually see in the top left corner of the billboard a blacked out section where they blacked out some letters and clearly a phone number that started with 800 that, because you see the parentheses 80 and then you don't see the rest of it. It's all blacked out. Who knows what it was? It may have even been done digitally. Like they might have accidentally left it in there, or they might have purposely left it in there thinking, you know what, let's just put this in there, and then realize, oh, you know, we don't have any permission for that. And they had to.
I thought it was one of those things potentially where it either had been vandalized or maybe they were, you know, it was like starting to get changed out to another billboard.
So intentionally left this way as if there's a story behind it.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Because, I mean, it does look like it's redacted, but it's also in a place where if someone were vandalizing it, now it's not, you couldn't climb up to there, but if you had gotten on the roof and kind of, you know, come over the top, you know, maybe there had been some graffiti or something, and then they were covering it up by just putting black bars there or something.
Well, if there's one thing that I am always impressed with people who decide to do vandalized buildings and stuff, they get to some crazy places. And so I wouldn't put it past them to hang off the side of the building.
Exactly. Because if you can't get there, you know, if you put your tag in a place where other people can't get to, you know, you get top credit. So
exactly. Right. So, all right. So we get now finally to get a sense of not only the town, but we're seeing where Jane and Eric and Darcy are working. And it's inside, as we'll come to find out, this vacant car dealership, Smith Motors, at the very end of the street. And we see them busy working. Before we start talking about them working, I do just have to point out that through the door behind Jane, as soon as we kind of cut to this, we see another building next door, which I guess I'll have to look later to figure out where this building is. I think it's probably as you're facing the building, it's on the building's right. But through the window in there, you can see a hammock and somebody laying down in the hammock.
Oh, really?
It was about 31 seconds in. And I have to think that this was actually like a crew, a building where the crew was hanging out and a place to just kind of relax, take 5 or whatever. And that it's just a crew person who happens to be in the hammock laying down over there, which
that's
I think
funny.
Is very
funny.
Yeah.
But it kind of works in this town, right? It's not so high tech that you wouldn't think that there might. Why would there be a hammock there? Because it kind of makes sense in this location.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not anything that I worry too much about. And they probably said, should we cover that up? No, it's fine. We'll just, somebody sleeping in a hammock in the next building. Yeah. It's nothing to spend money, spend our precious CG money covering up. So
right.
So we get into this conversation now, and this is kind of an interesting moment because we're getting into a little more exposition about what they're thinking. And at this point, Jane and Eric start saying, it looks like it could be an Einstein-Rosen bridge. And then Darcy steps in as our audience surrogate, who is great. I mean, she's just like, what's that? And I don't know, the conversation between her and Eric is very funny because, and the whole thing about how she was a poli-sci major. She's not actually a science major. It's poli-sci. She was the only applicant. Like that whole bit. I don't know. It speaks to Darcy and it makes her work so well in this context as our audience surrogate to get a sense as to what a wormhole is.
And the fact that Jane, she only had one applicant, and and then when you get to the second film, Darcy now has taken on an intern, and
right.
It's just nobody wants to work with these people, really.
It's very comical, very funny. But this is where we start learning about wormholes and an Einstein-Rosen bridge and a wormhole. Albert Einstein and Nathan Rosen in 1935, they came up with this idea using the theory of relativity. And the whole idea was bridges through space-time. And it's a wormhole basically could theoretically, still not proven, transport an object from two different points without any time or distance involved. It basically just moves from one place to the other. And this, I just have to read this because this is the more precise way to describe it. It is a transcendental bijection of the space-time continuum, an asymptomatic projection of the Calabi-Yau manifold manifesting itself in anti-de Sitter space.
Nice.
Wow.
This moment here brings up something that I get into debates with other friends. So I write this article series called Sci-Fi Saturdays, which happens to show up on Saturdays, but also because it feels like sci-fi films are kind of, like a Saturday matinee sort of staple, at least from the early days.
Yeah.
And as I collect my data about what movies I want to do, I'm like, do I do superhero films? Are superhero films sci-fi films, or are superhero films that have sci-fi elements or horror elements? So I think I am of the opinion that superhero films are their own genre, basically. But films like parts of Thor here, or Ant-Man, or I don't know,
Iron Man.
Iron Man are sci-fi style stories. They have high scientific elements in them, but there's also plenty of fantasy and rom-com and all sorts of other stuff that are in here. But I like that they really get into, they're not making up comic science stuff here. They're using like real science theories for the people out there that have heard of or might know what an Einstein-Rosen bridge is, and it works for this. It's, okay, well, that's a good scientific way to look at this, and from the Earth, we're looking at things as science or magic, but, we get told later it's all just advanced science, but they don't even necessarily know how it works. So
I know. Well, and then some of it is like Loki is still using magic. I mean, are we calling that some other form of science? It gets to a point where I don't know.
And all the Doctor Strange stuff that pops up.
That's definitely just the magic, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're mentioning stuff like, they're saying the lensing around the edges, likely referring to like gravitational lensing. So I feel like when the screenwriters were putting this together, they were actually talking to scientists and trying to come up with something that sounded like, if we saw a real wormhole appear, what would it look like? And they're probably getting some of this verbiage from those people, would be my guess.
Well, and I like the fact that, Jane latches on to, maybe we believe it, maybe we don't. Eric doesn't necessarily seem convinced. And she's like, yeah, but look at these stars. These aren't our stars. Like this one section of the photo, like these are all our stars around the outside. But in the middle, we're looking at a different part of the galaxy somewhere. It's a good cinematic way to look at it because it's yet something else that is relatively easy to say in terms of the dialogue, so that the audience can go, oh, okay, well, I see that this character understands, something about this. Maybe I don't, but, that it's showing that she knows what she's talking about and having this other character agree with her. But it's also, again, something that would really be there. It's not just some sort of fake Hollywood technobabble, like a Star Trek thing.
Yeah, and then when she says things like, unless Ursa Minor took the day off, I mean, that sounds like something, she's being cheeky, but also she's pulling a reference for an actual constellation, Ursa Minor, that theoretically would be in the sky, as she says, in the star alignment for our quadrant this time of year. So theoretically, it sounds very much like it makes sense what she's saying.
Right. And even analyzing it, it still sounds like she makes sense, because sometimes there's stuff where you break it. It sounds plausible when you watch the movie and then you start to break it down and it kind of loses meaning, but there's still something here when she's talking about the Little Dipper. So
exactly. So well, is there anything else that you caught that you wanted to talk about in this particular minute? Or I mean, we're kind of in the middle of, she's leaving us hanging about
right in the middle of the sentence. I know,
whole thing with Ursa Minor.
Yeah, no, that was pretty much it. Like 4 big beats here, I think, was covered everything that I want to talk about.
Awesome. Well, Jay, let's talk a little bit more about what you have to offer and where people can find you as far as like your sites, your podcasts. Where should people go learn more about what you're up to?
You got two main places, mculocationscout.com. If you want to keep up with the filming locations of the different movies and Disney Plus shows and one-shots. I'm not doing the cartoons with like What If or anything like that. And I do have some stuff up from Shang-Chi, and hopefully we'll put up a little bit more once that's available on a way that I can get some screenshots because it's kind of useless to talk about a location and not have any visual footage there to share with folks. So that's up. You can also go to retrozap.com where I have my podcasts and my articles posted. As I mentioned, I'm doing Sci-Fi Saturdays. In October, I also every year, or at least the last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing 31 Days of Horror, where I actually write a review about a different horror film every day. It's quite a big challenge there.
Fun.
But I've got podcasts about superheroes. Superhero Suite is the show that I do with my friend Josh, where we talk about all things superheroes. We also do a after show for The Flash called Scarlet Velocity, a Flash podcast. And then we also have a show about finding the fun in everything called Enjoy Stuff, where we discuss different pop culture things from the 70s or even before up through today. Talk about movies, TV, music, all sorts of really cool, fun stuff there.
So cool. So many places to track you down and check out all the amazing work you're up to. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today's show. We'll be back one more time with Jay tomorrow to talk about Minute 35. So for now, thank you all for all of the support you do. And as Matthew would say, have a good day. And as I would say, until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.